I'm Ariam, and this is my reading vlog of Djinn City by Saad Hussein. So Saad Hussein, all his books and short stories and novellas happen in this kind of apocalyptic, not quite, not really apocalyptic actually, but it happens in this sci-fi world around 50 to 100 years in the future in and around Bangladesh, where Saad Hussein is from. Um, the last book I read actually happened in Nepal. So all of about my reading journey with Saad Hussein, the first thing I read of him was a short story in the collection The Djinn Falls in Love and Other Stories, which I really, really liked. And then I was like, I should read other books by this guy. So I looked it up, and the first book that interested me was The Gurkha and the Lord of Tuesday, which I loved. It was like one of my favorite books. It's a novella. It was one of my favorite books of the year. And then I decided to read another novella by him, Kunda Wakes Up, and I didn't like it. The storyline bored me. It wasn't for me. So I DNF'd that. But I still wanted to read other books by him. So now I'm starting Djinn City, which is a full-length book. So far I've read one short story, one novella, DNF one novella, and now this is a full-length 400 plus page book, which is very interesting. So I'm a bit nervous about the fact that it's so long, and also about the fact that I didn't like Kunda Wakes Up. But we'll see, because I don't actually remember what Djinn City is about. So, I only got like 3 pages into Djinn City so far, but I'm having a lot of fun. So, I read the tables of contents, sorry. Contents of tables of, I don't know. But they were fun chapter titles. So obviously they didn't tell me what really going to happen in the book. With kids' books, that does happen. But with older books, especially long books, you don't really understand what's going to happen from the table of contents. It's very fun to read them and then figure out, oh, this is why the chapter was named that way, especially if it was like some name that you really remember. In this case, I didn't have anything that I really remembered, except for the fact that there were a few chapters that were called the same thing, which is the name of one of the characters. And then it starts with the main players and explains a little bit about each of them. But then it says to go read the glossary and the appendices. So I did that, and then I read like the very first little bit of the chapter, where it goes, and then you have like the space or the asterisk to tell you the next part. And I really enjoyed what I read so far. It was very funny. It reminded me a lot more of the book and short story that I liked rather than the one that I didn't, but it's very definitely its own thing, which is very nice. Also, I've read in the past day 271 pages of the 340 pages of Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. And on one hand, I'm really enjoying it. Like, I love this book. This is going to be so good. On the other hand, I'm kind of frustrated. Okay, so this book, it happens in a future, probably maybe like 100 years in the future, where there are, and it's being told, I don't want to spoil anything, which is kind of hard. Oh, the back literally just tells the first like 3 pages because it's super hard not to spoil anything. But we're being told all of this book through the perspective of an artificial intelligence robot called an artificial friend, who is made to become the friend of a teenager. And what's frustrating about it is because she honestly knows so little about this world that we get to know very little about this world. And we're figuring it out along with her. But, like, I'm over halfway through the book and, like, I kind of want to have some more world building, which I don't think I'm going to get. Like, I figure out the main things that I need to know, but we're sorry about the noise, but there's like some things like I want to know how the world got to this point, and I don't think that's something that Kazuo Ishiguro is even going to do. Like that's not something he's interested in, which is fine. Like it's not it's just not the book. That's fine not to have that world building and just have, yeah, this is how the world is now. in this book, but I am mainly a fantasy reader, and that is something that I would like, and it frustrates me not to have that. Also, I really love this cover. I just like it so much. It's not, this looks like it's see-through, but it's not, and I really like that for reasons that are in the book. So I'm 70 pages into Djinn City, and I realized that this is not sci-fi. So I forgot to say that actually the books that I did read, or DNF, were sci-fi fantasy. The Djinn in the title Djinn City are very real and existing. And the other ones generally were sci-fi fantasy, but this one is just fantasy. It happens in our time. It's like it seems to be kind of a portal fantasy. And I'm quite enjoying it so far. It's not my favorite, but I think it's just because I'm like reading a book I really enjoy, Klara and the Sun, and I just read a book that I really, really liked that was just like totally up my alley. That, you know, the kind of books that's like, this is so far up my alley that it's hard to get books that, like, you know, fit you so exactly. So I do think that if I don't have those two experiences just now, I might be enjoying this a tiny bit more, especially because people kept interrupting me when I was reading this morning, so I wasn't able to get into it. But I am enjoying it. I think it's really serious, but it's written in a really funny way. And now that I'm actually a little bit into it, I can tell you what it's about. So our main character, Indilbed, is 10 years old, and he's part of this family that's very rich, very renowned. They have like a lot of high government positions. They're lawyers, they're ambassadors, bankers, stuff like that. Um, but his father is a drunkard after his mother is dead. And he discovers, after, along with the rest of his family, or rather, the woman and children in his family, the men already knew this, that his mother was a djinn. And what else does he discover as he's discovering this? That the djinn have decided to hunt him to death. And that's like the beginning of the story, but it really goes everywhere. Like, already from the beginning, there's so many like conspiracies and different people wanting different things. And at the same time, like, just, and it doesn't go at all the way that you'd expect it to go, which is really fun. Like, it's just not like, I like the classic fantasies, but I've read so much of them that it's fun to see something that sort of like doesn't do it the same, but not like in a I'm not doing it the same because I'm better than you. Just like he had a different idea, and it's really fun. I also I find Indilbed as a character quite interesting because, like, if he were a real person, I really like him because he he's somehow he's 10 years old. He's somehow like so sure of himself that it seems like he's controlling the situation, even though he's not. He's 10 years old. He's been neglected by his father and his family his whole life. Now he's being hunted by these Djinn. He is not in control, but because he's so sure of himself, and because he won't take on the shame that his family puts on him, because his family shames him for being his father's son because his father's a drunkard, and he just like refuses to take on that shame, and so he makes himself seem in not in charge, but like controlling the situation, even though he's not because he's 10, and I really love that. But at the same time, the reason he's an interesting character is because he doesn't really talk much, which I think also adds the vibe of him controlling the situation, because when he does talk, it's to say something as important to the situation. And at the same time, he is 10 years old. Like, the author's not, like, he's precocious. He's a little precocious, but he's precocious as a 10-year-old. You know, like how there are authors who write, like, oh, I'm going to write a precocious child, and then they act super mature. And, like, he's not super mature. He's pretty smart. He's smart enough to get the social dynamics totally down, you know, and react to them in maybe a more adult way than most 10-year-olds would. but he's still 10 years old, and you can clearly see it, which I really like. I'm really enjoying this author's writing. The only thing is that I am finding it a little slow. I know I'm only 70 pages in, but there I'm just finding it a little slow. But I'm finding a lot of all of the books I'm reading right now are a little slow. So it might be a me problem. Like I just might be finding everything I read right now a little slow. Um, so I honestly think it's a me problem, especially because people kept on interrupting me in the morning. The other thing I will say is that uh, I discovered why the chapters are named. There are certain chapters named after a person, and there is like this Jinn realm. I'm really enjoying. It's not science fiction; it's fantasy, but there are science fiction elements of like how the Jinn work and how the Jinn realm works, which I'm really enjoying. Also, the Jinn realm does remind me of the Jinn realm in the Bartimaeus trilogy by Jonathan Stroud, which, like, I also find I like that because I really like the Bartimaeus trilogy, so I like that it reminds me, even though they're totally different series. These are totally different books, like totally different vibe. But I do like that that part reminds me. I'm really enjoying this book. During weekdays I mostly read while waiting for the bus and on the bus. And it's one of these books where like I get out of work and I'm like, oh, I'm so excited to go to the bus stop. Sorry. In order to read this book. I find the way it's written both really good, but also really, really fascinating. So it's a multiple POV book, POV. And so there are two main characters, Indabed and Laif. And we get sorry. And we get POVs from both of them, and then we also get some small POVs from some other characters just to tell us what's going on because it's a very complicated, like lots of things, lots of conspiracies and plans and stuff. So generally, I don't mind when there are like little small POVs telling us what's going on just to let us know. But I do usually mind when there are like main character POVs having more than one, like because you always want to go back to the other character. And then this one is done really well. Like when I'm with the character, I generally do not want to go back to the other character because like every time you move from character to character, generally it's just like everything that you need to know about Indilbed or Race at that moment is you know it. You don't like it's very well done and like you always know what you need to know about what's going on with that character when you move to the other character and then you move back. And also like I just I really love also the way the plot is. Generally, I am more of a character driven person. And I enjoy the characters here for the most part. I don't like there's one character I don't like around Uncle Sakim just because like I don't get his motivation at all. So, but he's a very minor character. But I really am enjoying the characters. They're very funny, but they're not like it's not like a bunch of there's not like a it's not very character driven at all. There's not a lot of character development or anything. But the plot is so good. Like you have like this you have like all these little details that you're like, "Oh, I know that's important, but I don't know why it's going to be important." And like dropping hints that something's bad about this thing, and then it comes and it's just like so creepy. And it's not exactly in a horror way. It's just everything that he this writer does is very understated in a very good way. Like it's not like shouting at you. Like I said, I enjoy the humor in this book. I don't like books. I don't like humor books. I don't like they always feel to me like they're trying to be funny, which is a me thing. Like I know it's personal, but I don't like them. And this book has understated humor. On the other hand, like the horror stuff happening in this book is also really understated, which actually makes it like more horrifying. Like one of our main characters going through this really like body horror, awful, awful thing, and it's just, and it's not like there's no gore described. Like, none of the actual changes that this character is going through is described, but the way that he feels is described is just, it's so creepy. It's like, more than creepy, it's horrifying. Like, it's literally horrifying. And also, all the way I'm halfway through the book, and the way all the pieces are starting to fall into place, it's so good, and it's so creepy. It's really, really good. Also, this is a fully science fantasy at this point. Like, it's happening pretty much in our times. It, I'm not sure exactly when the book starts with Nokia phones, and then it jumps 10 years in the future, and they seem to have smartphones. So maybe like 10 years ago, like, pretty much modern times. But, and then we have these Djinn, but, and obviously, and they do magic, and obviously, and there's spells, and obviously that's all very fantasy, but the way it's described, which I'm really enjoying, is it's science fiction. Like, the Djinn are fantasy, but they're also science fiction. Like, they talk about like their DNA, and there's dark matter involved. It's very cool, and I really enjoy it. And I don't think I've ever read a book at all similar to this, and I hope I get to in the future more with God's help, because I really like this book. So unfortunately, I accidentally deleted the clip that I took after finishing Klara and the Sun, and I can find no way to restore it. So A, I guess I'm never deleting anything again, and B, I'm gonna try my best to recreate it. So I was reading the blurbs, like all the little recommendations, read this book that they have in this kind of book. And what was interesting to me is that most of them say that this book is about human connection, and there was one that said it's about innocence, and I can understand both of those things. But I actually think this book is about roles, the roles that we have in society. And I don't think roles are necessarily a bad thing. They're something pretty natural. Like, I'm not going to behave the same way when I'm at work working with kids as I do with my friends, and so on and so forth. But then there are roles that society or other people, not necessarily society, that's something very, very broad, but like that are placed upon us. Or not even roles that are placed upon us, but expectations of how we should act in those roles. Like, for example, you can have a role as a mother, and then there are expectations of how in different of how people should behave as a mother, what it means to be a mother. Um, and a very basic example of roles that other people place upon us would be stereotypes. And those roles are the roles that can hurt. And I think that that is what this book is about. And it's very interesting. The thing that made me think of this is the way that Klara, our main character, our AI, is the way that she thinks and talks about other people. So she always refers to them by the role. Like, so as I said, her job, she's a slave, but her job is to be friends with, and to help this teenager. A teenager, but she was chosen specifically by this one. And when it comes to this teenager's mother, she always calls her the mother, capital M. And of course, Josie, that's the teenager's mother, has different roles. She's also her husband's ex-wife. She's Josie's best friend's mother's best friend. She, whatever role she has in her job, that's also her role. But Klara could only think of her in this one role. And that's the way that Klara basically thinks of everyone in this book. Even when she calls them by their name for whatever reason, she's still thinking of them in one role, and it's very, very obvious. And the way this book ends is that basically everyone, sorry, everyone sticks to the roles in this society. And I actually, and that's the thing I think. Like I said, that my complaint with this book is that there isn't a lot of world building in here at all, and I wanted more personally. But I also think that the book could have been better with more world building, because just a little bit more. But because everyone stays within their roles in this society, and this is obviously an important part of the book, I think it would have helped a lot more. I think it would have helped a lot just to have a little more understanding of what those roles exactly are. I think, and I definitely, and this is not a long book. It's not a short book, but it's not a long book, and definitely just like 20 to 50 more pages. Not 50, that's absurd. But 20 to 30, 35 more pages just that would help expand on that world building, telling us what the society is and what the rules and what the expectations are. I think they actually would have helped um, make the ending a little more actually, if that makes sense. But one of the things I also found interesting is when it comes to expectations of the roles, not only how everyone follows the path that they're supposed to, but also how they put others in the path through Klara. So this is spoilers for the end, but Josie and her mother obviously really like Klara. They really like her. And so does Josie's best friend Rick. Like there are a lot of people who like Klara, but at the end of the day, her job is ended when Josie goes to college, and then she just goes to like this yard where there are old electronic pieces because that her role is ended. So now that's what she's going to do. She's going to sit in this yard. And people continue being nice to her. Like the people who work in this yard are like, "Do you want to go and talk to other retired AIs?" But she was put into this role, and when it ended, she's like, she's useless. Just like once her role is ended, it's almost like she was a person and now she isn't, which is something that's interesting to think about in terms of this book and like how people can view the different roles that people have. Um, though, especially in how like people can view older people, especially who are having a tough time, and how they can view children or people who like don't take on the traditional roles of modern society of being workers, like disabled people and so on. Disabled people, children, old people. Um, that's kind of interesting to think about when it comes to this book. In the original clip, they talked a lot longer about children in special education, um, but I'm not going to do that here because I forgot exactly how I connected it. And well, it was less about children in special education and more about the way we treat children in special education and how that's slowly been getting better. But anyways, those were basically my thoughts. And obviously, my last thought is that I've said I love this cover. Sorry, I also love the color of the cover, but I really do like this. I just love that this part is actually not see-through. It's a box that connects to this box. Just because, like, there are some things that go on in the book about Klara seeing through boxes, which I, which I'm pretty sure has to do with the way she sees roles because of when it happens. But, anyways, I really like this book. I love the cover. if this sounds interesting to you, you should definitely read it, and I definitely want to try to read, hopefully, more by Kazuo Ishiguro. Maybe Never Let Me Go or The Remains of the Day. Okay, I finished Djinn City, and I have to quote one of the main characters from the book and just say, about the ending, what the fuck? Like, okay, so I actually have two opinions about the ending, because there are actually two endings. So most books that have two main characters start off with the characters apart and then bring them together as the story goes on. This book starts with the characters the same place, and then they deconverge, and they never reconverge. So there are essentially two endings. There is the Indilbed ending, and there's the Ra'is ending, and I like one of them, and I'm not a big fan of the other. So the Indilbed ending is the one I like. And neither of the endings are good, but in Indilbed's case, it's well, like, when I say they're not good, I mean they're not happy. But in Indilbed's case, it's a good ending. Like, I liked it. Like, it's set up perfectly. You know that this is going to happen, and you know that it has to happen, and you know why. And at the same time, you're reading it, and you're like waiting for something to change, for something to rescue this horrible thing that's going to happen. You're like waiting for the Deus Ex Machina, but there are no Deus Ex Machina in this world. That is not something that happens in the world, in this, of the book. And so it works perfectly, and it's absolutely horrible to read, but like, it's not enjoyable, but it's very well written. And then there is Ra'is's ending. And a lot of people said that Ra'is's ending felt unfinished. And I think I actually have a very easy fix for it. Just make Ra'is's ending an epilogue. Instead of it being the last chapter, it should have been an epilogue. And then it would have felt more finished, more like, oh, there is more to go, but we're not going to see it. But as it is like the two last chapters, it does feel unfinished. It also, like, there is, in David's case, it's like, yeah, that's the end of his story. Horrible that that's the end of his story, but that's the end of his story. But in Rais's case, we're not necessarily of Indilbed's story only, but also of the story that surrounds Indilbed, because like I said, they have these big plots that surround them. But it's also the end of Indilbed's story. But in Rais's case, it's not the end of the Rais's story, and it's not the end of this big plot. And it also pulls another character in at the very end, which obviously that's not great. But so it definitely feels like there should have been something more. And I think that it could have been mostly fixed just by making it an epilogue instead of a last chapter. But other than that, I found it a very, very interesting book. I wouldn't recommend it to a lot of people. It's not an easy book to read. I mentioned before the body horror, that at that point it wasn't graphic. It does get more graphic, and not in the usual sci-fi body horror. It is just straight up body horror. Like, not in the fun way. But I thought like all of the things were built, like they were like built up so carefully. And nothing, like there were no, everything felt like it was that kind of book that when you get to something, when you get to a plot point, you're like, oh, I know exactly how we got here. Like in the perfect way, like everything is built up. There's no like, oh, here's something that you didn't guess. And I think I want to give a moral to this book, and that is to tell the truth. And more telling, and not just telling the truth as in not lying, but telling the truth as in not hiding stuff, and also telling the truth as in showing the people you love that you love them. Because every bad thing that happens in this book is a direct result of hiding the truth, especially when especially hiding the truth of loving someone. And also, I found interesting Indolid's character. I'll say this without spoilers. Can I say it without spoilers? I found interesting that Indolid's character was basically a pawn in a lot of other people's uh, lives, and how that and how that built his story around him. So that's Djinn City. And this should be the end of the vlog, but I just want to say one more thing about Klara and the sun that I forgot to say, and that it's not that I disagree with the people who say that Klara and the sun is about human connection. I just think that human connection is not what the book is about exactly, it's the answer. Because basically this book, one of the main questions it asks is there something that makes every person uniquely them, that nobody would be able to copy. There would be no AI would be able to copy and be like the exact same person. And the book's answer is like a resounding yes. And the reason it says yes is because of human connection, because of the ties that people have with each other that help make them who they are. Like that nothing could like take the place of those ties that people build throughout their life. And I really like that, actually. I really like the answer. I I agree with it that there's sounding yes. Um, and I agree that that's one of the reasons. Personally, I'm religious, so I also think that there's more to it than just human connection. There's like human to human connection. There's also human to God connection. That, like, obviously that's my opinion, and the human connection is Kazuo Ishiguro's opinion, and you may have different opinions, but I really like that question and the answer and the reason for the answer, because like, oh my god, books that just are like yes but don't give a reason, what's the point then? Anyways, it was the vlog. I read Djinn City by Saadzi Hossein and Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I definitely recommend Klara and the Sun. I do recommend Djinn City if you want a book with a very intricate plot that and you are fine with horror read stuff that are not actually in the horror genre. And if you want a funny, dark book that's not like trying too hard to be funny. Anyways, thank you for watching. See you after.